Himalayan mountain range, Nepal. Here lies the imposing, frightening, and at the same time inviting highest mountain on planet Earth, Mount Everest. The 8,148-meter massif, with an estimated weight of 162 billion tons, has attracted the attention, boldness, and courage of adventurous men and women since the beginning of the 20th century, all eager to reach its summit. Some actually made it, and many were those who remained in Everest's history forever. In this video, you will see the most shocking stories surrounding Mount Everest. So don't take your eyes off the screen, and if necessary, grab a coat, because the weather is about to get much colder. And it's good to be together again. I hope everything is well with you. An open-air cemetery, well, that's what Mount Everest can be called. And more than that, many of the climbers who died during the ascent or descent are still there and will remain there. But why? Why are the bodies left behind instead of being brought down for proper funerals with their families? Well, several bodies of climbers who died on Everest and other mountains have never been and will never be recovered. That's a fact. And the main reason is brutally simple. The cost of bringing down a corpse is often another person's life. Above 8,000 meters in altitude, the rules of biology and physics change drastically, making the recovery of a body one of the most dangerous operations on the planet. We're not only talking about altitude and all the mountain's challenges, but also monstrous storms, zero visibility, and a bone-chilling cold. To complicate matters even further, helicopters cannot reach just any point on the mountain. The air up there is far too thin for the blades to generate enough lift. Without lift, there's not enough thrust to keep the aircraft in the air. A helicopter's operational ceiling, meaning the maximum safe altitude it can reach, is around 6,000 meters, roughly the height of Everest's Camp 2. Beyond that, it becomes a suicidal operation. Speaking of which, something curious has been happening lately. Due to global warming, the ice is melting and exposing old bodies that had been buried within it. This has forced the Nepalese government and Sherpa associations to carry out extremely risky cleanup missions aimed at removing some of these bodies for sanitary and image-related reasons. However, that represents only a minority. The story of George Mallory and Andrew Irvine and their fate on Mount Everest represents one of mountaineering's greatest mysteries, especially regarding whether they were the first to conquer the summit. That is a question that will likely never be answered. Mallory and Irvine were part of a British expedition in 1924. At that time, access to Everest was restricted to the mountain's north side, as Nepal and Tibet were closed to foreigners. These British adventurers set out with one single goal. They may possibly have reached the summit, but they never returned. Although they failed to come back, this attempt is perhaps considered the most famous of all Everest endeavors. Due to the uncertainty surrounding their success or failure, the first verified record of a successful ascent to the summit was only registered 30 years later, with Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay on May 29, 1953. The main mystery persisted for decades. In 1999, the Mallory and Irvine research expedition was organized with the goal of finding evidence. It was only in May of that year that climber Conrad Anker discovered a body that could belong to one of them. The find was at 8,156 meters, and the body was lying face down, well preserved by the cold and dry conditions. After excavation, the labels confirmed the identity, the letter G followed by Mallory. The body revealed severe injuries indicating a violent fall, including fractures of the tibia and fibula in the right leg. Rope injuries around his torso suggested that he and Irvine were roped together when the accident occurred. As for Andrew Irvine, there were also expeditions that attempted to find his body and evidence of what happened. In 2001, much of the 1999 team returned and discovered nearly all the pre-World War II camps on the mountain, including Camp 6 from 1924, last occupied by the duo Mallory and Irvine. The mystery surrounding Irvine persisted until a successful search in 2024, when a National Geographic team found partial remains of the climber. The remains included a foot, a boot, and a sock, bearing Irvine's name tape, at an altitude at least 2,000 meters below where Mallory was discovered. Although the discovery of Irvine's remains brought some relief to the family, the enigma surrounding the first ascent remains. Among the countless dark stories scattered across Everest's icy slopes, few are as well known and enigmatic as that of Green Boots. This is the nickname given to an unidentified climber whose body rested for decades inside a small limestone cave on Everest's north route, on the Tibetan side. His nickname comes from the most striking detail of the frozen figure, a pair of bright lime green mountaineering boots, extremely eye-catching and visible from several meters away. Because the body lay on its side, curled up right along the narrow trail passage, practically everyone who climbed the north route ended up encountering those boots, and by extension, the inert body of the still unidentified climber. It became so common that the body turned into an involuntary landmark on the climb. It was normal to hear someone say, "After Green Boots, there's not much left to reach the summit," or "It's just to the left of Green Boots." But who, after all, is Green Boots? Officially, the body was never identified, but the most accepted theory points to a man named Sewang Paljor, a police officer from the Indian paramilitary force known as the Indo-Tibetan Border Police, ITBP. In 1996, he and his group attempted to reach the summit, but a brutal storm hit the mountain. 3 team members disappeared, and Paljor was one of those wearing green boots identical to those seen in the cave. Even so, this has never been 100% confirmed. The cave where Green Boots rested is a tiny natural shelter, more of a crevice than an actual cave. It is located at around 8,500 meters of altitude in the so-called death zone, where oxygen is so low that the human body begins to deteriorate even while standing still. Passing by that point is almost unavoidable for those climbing from Tibet. For many years, it was impossible to ascend without seeing that frozen body, a silent reminder of human fragility in the face of the mountain. However, since 2010, there have been reports that the body is no longer visible. No one knows whether it was moved by a rescue team, which would be unusual as there was no official announcement, or displaced by an avalanche, which is likely, or simply covered by ice, which is also possible. High on Everest, where the air becomes almost a whisper and life depends on every single step, the story of Francis Arsenyev took on legendary contours. She became known as Sleeping Beauty of the mountain, a name that carries deep melancholy. For years, those who passed along the north route encountered her motionless body, her face calm, almost serene, as if she were merely resting after a long walk. But behind that peaceful appearance was one of the most striking tragedies in Everest's history. On May 22, 1998, Frances accomplished what many considered impossible. She became the first American woman to reach the summit of the world without supplemental oxygen. A gigantic and extremely dangerous feat. She and her husband, Sergei, had planned everything carefully, but the mountain tends to ignore plans. During the descent, something went wrong. Darkness, extreme exhaustion, and unpredictable weather separated the couple. When the morning light finally touched Everest, Frances was alone. That was when 2 climbers, Ian Woodall and Kathy O'Dowd, found her. Frances was still breathing, but it was evident that the mountain was claiming her. Hypothermia, exhaustion, consciousness slipping away like melting snow through fingers. They tried to help her, but there at 8,000 meters in the death zone, even compassion has cruel limits. Kathy and Ian stayed with her for about an hour, powerless before the inevitable. Kathy later wrote that she had never experienced anything so devastating. On Everest, she had already passed bodies and even lost friends, but nothing compared to watching a life fade away in front of her while holding her hand. In May 1996, Everest lived through one of its darkest chapters. On the 10th and 11th of that month, a violent snowstorm caught several teams by surprise after they had already reached the summit and were attempting to return. The descent, which should be the safest part of the climb, if such a moment even exists, turned into a nightmare. 8 climbers lost their lives, trapped by bad weather in the death zone. And that was not an isolated case. The entire season was marked by tragedy. 12 people died during those weeks of expeditions, making 1996 the deadliest year in Everest's history at that time. That number would only be surpassed decades later, under even more dramatic circumstances. The 16 victims of the 2014 avalanche and the 22 deaths caused by avalanches following the April 2015 earthquake in Nepal. The 1996 disaster reverberated around the world, raising important debates about where adventure ends and business begins. For many, that year exposed something uncomfortable. Everest was becoming a product, and the consequences of its commercialization could be deadly. What is most intriguing is that the mountain is not selective. It doesn't matter whether its victim has years of experience or just started climbing today. In the events of 1996, as in others, not only inexperienced adventurers, but also highly seasoned climbers, with experience above 8,000 meters, especially on Everest itself, were placed in deadly situations where the only element required to survive was luck. For those fascinated by ghost stories, Everest is literally a mountain of them. Obviously, a place where hundreds have lost their lives carries that mysterious aura that only death can imprint. Strange reports frequently emerge of people who claim to have seen shadows, heard voices, laments, screams, and cries for help at certain points, usually near higher camps. Those who went through such experiences swear they searched in every possible way to find someone truly in danger. But in reality, there was no one asking for help. They were people who did not receive help when they needed it. But if there is one creature that haunts the entire Himalayan region and is world famous, it is the Yeti, known by many as the Abominable Snowman. The legend began in 1921 during an expedition led by the British explorer Charles Howard Berry. Members of his team told a journalist named Henry Newman that they had found enormous footprints in the snow, although Howard Berry claimed they were wolf tracks. Local guides and porters disagreed, saying the tracks belonged to the legendary Metokangmi, which can be translated as something like man-bear snow creature. Newman was intrigued and spoke with Tibetans who claimed to have seen the footprints. They mentioned stories of a mysterious and wild creature roaming the Himalayas. Fascinated, the journalist needed an appealing name for the newspapers. A mistranslation of Meto led people to think it meant something like filthy snowman. So he invented something far more evocative, the Abominable Snowman. And thus the legend of the Yeti, its Tibetan name, became global, capturing imaginations and inspiring more than a century of studies, research, and cryptozoological searches. The hairy biped resembled an ape. It has different forms and sizes. Sometimes it is considered much taller than a human, and sometimes small, but terribly strong. Although often portrayed with white fur to blend into the snowy landscape, it can also be reddish-brown and live in the forests of the Himalayas. Everest's death zone begins silently. so silently it feels as though the mountain itself is holding its breath. And in a way, it is. There, above 8,000 meters of altitude, oxygen is so scarce that the human body simply cannot survive for long. It is a territory where time runs faster than footsteps, and any mistake, hesitation, or delay can be fatal. They call this stretch the death zone because the body truly begins to deteriorate. The mind slows down, vision loses focus, and muscles fail. Consciousness flickers like a candle about to go out. Many climbers describe the sensation as trying to think inside a confused dream. Without supplemental oxygen, every minute is negotiated with life. And even with oxygen, the struggle is constant. It is in this inhospitable environment that stories, as unsettling as they are fascinating, emerge, such as that of the climber who walked toward the summit without realizing he was dying. In 2006, a climber named David Sharp was found sitting motionless inside a cavity on the north route. Several teams passed by him, believing he was resting. And this, in fact, is one of the dangers of the death zone. People appear to be sleeping when in reality they are succumbing to hypothermia and oxygen deprivation. When it was finally realized that he was semi-conscious but unable to move, it was already too late. The altitude simply did not allow for an effective rescue. The mountain had performed yet another of its private rituals. But what happened to David? Well, he left the last camp alone, which is not recommended at all. Although he was a prepared climber, the ambition to reach the summit heroically spoke louder. But a storm above 8,000 meters is a storm in the death zone. From the position in which he was found, it appears he may have sat down intentionally, perhaps to shield himself from the strong freezing winds, or simply to rest. However, the absence of a spare oxygen cylinder further suggests that he may have stopped due to lack of air. Since the early 1990s, Everest has ceased to be only the roof of the world and has also become a multi-million-dollar business. International agencies began selling complete ascent packages to anyone willing to pay. Prices range from $45,000 for basic support to $115,000 for personalized expeditions with VIP services included. The result was an explosive increase in the flow of people arriving at the mountain, often without the necessary experience to face such extreme conditions. This uncontrolled growth transformed Everest into a saturated environment. At the highest points, especially above Camp 4, beyond 8,000 meters, the overcrowding created a problem as surreal as it is dangerous. Human traffic jams in the death zone, there where oxygen is so scarce that the body begins to slowly shut down and every minute matters. Long lines force climbers to remain stationary in freezing temperatures, exposed to wind, disorientation, and the depletion of oxygen cylinders, a scenario that greatly multiplies the risk of fatal accidents. A famous viral photo from May 22, 2019, showing an endless line of climbers heading toward the summit, became the symbol of this commercial exploitation and its dangers. The impact is not limited to safety. Everest also suffers from the environmental weight of this extreme tourism. The more people climb, the more trash, discarded oxygen cylinders, and human waste are left scattered across the mountain, especially in areas where retrieving them is practically impossible. Many bodies also remain frozen along the routes. Between 1953 and 1993, there were 487 recorded ascents and 117 deaths. Between 1993 and 2018, the number of attempts jumped to 9,159 ascents, and 178 climbers lost their lives. Most of the bodies were never recovered, not due to lack of will, but because the conditions make removal extremely risky and, in many cases, unfeasible. With the mountain increasingly transformed into a product, Everest now faces pressure on three fronts: overcrowding, environmental impact, and a clear rise in accidents. Too high a price for a peak that ironically was first conquered in pursuit of challenge and respect, not profit. Thank you very much for your special company. I'll see you in the next video.